Welcome everybody. The lights are very bright here, so let me just see how many are in the room. I sense some after effects of last night's party, or else a sudden lack of interest in policy. But this will be a policy session, and we have 3 policy experts here, so it will be, I'm sure, very useful. And we've given plenty of time for questions. I'm Paul Bacsich. I'm owner and manager of a company called Matic Media Limited, which doesn't really tell you anything. But one of the things I do a lot of work is on policy work, directly or indirectly, for the European Commission on policies relating to online and distance learning and open educational resources and MOOCs and that kind of thing. And so I find this kind of thing, so I'm a real policy wonk, I find this kind of thing fascinating. I live it, and some people even pay me to live it, which is good to know. One shouldn't take policy in too narrow a sense, because a lot of national policy can be reflected in your own institutions, in fact should be. So there are a lot of institutional lessons you learn indirectly from this. So we're going to begin now, and we have 3 speakers. I think the early versions of the program on the web had 4 speakers. Unfortunately, our speaker from Germany couldn't be with us. There's a lot going on in Germany too, which you can find out from your German colleagues. So we have plenty of time for the presentations, but we still want to have plenty of time for your questions and discussion of more general issues. Because the one thing you learn about policy is doing them in isolation is not really the way in the modern world. You have to reflect on your neighbors and you know, policy synergies and the supranational bodies. So it's a fascinating international kind of activity. So our first speaker is Ahmed El-Sobky from the Information Technology Industry Development Agency, ITIDA, in Egypt. He's based in Cairo. He's currently holding the role as Vice President for ICT Market Development in the agency. So pretty broad brief by the sound of it, which is the agency is the implementation arm of the Egyptian Ministry of Communication and Information Technology. So he's responsible for managing all ICT-related sectors with respect to market development in this area. And he's been involved in over 30 years of work in this area. He's also, and this is crucial in these days, sadly perhaps, he's General Trustee of the Supreme Council in Egypt for Cybersecurity, a highly topical issue, of course. So, over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good afternoon to you. It's my pleasure to come again to Online Educa Berlin after 2 years of absence. Today we'll talk about what we are calling in Egypt the National Competency Framework. The National Competency Framework is the framework for developing the talents working in the ICT in Egypt. First of all, I will give you an overview about Egypt's ICT and what we are doing, and our organization, or my organization, ITIDA. In Egypt, Strategy 2030, we are concentrating on the ICT as the flagship for Egypt to make the economic growth very fast. ITIDA is the Information Technology Development Agency. It has been established in 2004 to develop the ICT industry in Egypt. Our vision is enhancing the whole ecosystem related to the ICT in Egypt. And our mission is to identify the needs of the industry. We are a governmental agency, but we are interested in developing the private sector. So our mandate is developing the ICT private sector in Egypt. We are not working with the part of developing the ICT in government. This is the mission of the MCIT, or the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology, but we are there for developing the private sector. What we do is we are the catalyst, we are the promoter, we are the developer of the whole elements of ICT in Egypt for the private sector. The ICT workforce in Egypt, according to the statistics by international bodies like McKinsey, like Ict, like Gartner, the whole things, are approximately 190,000 working in this field in Egypt, especially for the part working in the outsourcing. And they are planned to be approximately 250,000 very soon in 2021. And we are also trying to have them a total number of 1 million, because this 250,000 is the direct employees, and there is another 750,000 working as indirect employees, supporting the issue. What is ITIDA doing? ITIDA is focusing on the skill development, and that's why I'm here today. We are trying to upskill the talent working in the field of the ICT in Egypt. You know that the people are graduated from the universities. Egypt is graduating approximately 500,000 from the Egyptian public and private universities per year. 10% of them, which is 50,000, are working in or are graduated from disciplines related to the ICT, whether they are the computer science or engineering related to ICT in Egypt. In Egypt also, we reached approximately 104 million. Half of them are youth, and they are in the area of working, so that we need to take care of this wealth by enhancing them. Why to enhance them? Because we need to narrow the gap between the education and going to work, so that we are working hard with international organizations to develop programs to enhance this talent. What we are doing. We started with the IFC, a program called National Competency Framework 2 years ago. And we assigned with the IFC an international HR consultant called Ahmed to do this job. What is the competency framework? The competency framework is an integral component under a big umbrella called E4E, our education for employment, so that we are working very hard for education to employment directly, so that the people narrow the gap between getting graduated and be available for the work in the multinationals or the national companies working in the field of ICT. This framework has been started in implementation in 2016. What we are doing in this framework, the national framework is education, we went to survey the education system in Egypt, and also we did another survey for the needs of can we put off this slide a little bit? It's really bothering me. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. We tried to survey the needs of the industry. What is the real needs from the different sectors in Egypt? The software development, the electronics, the outsourcing, something like that, so that the people, the multinationals and the national companies give us the whole requirements for every job. We got approximately 62 jobs, the specs for 62 jobs in this type, and we started in 2015 by launching this program, and after launching we started to the design, the pre-design and then the design. So then we started in 2016 the adoption and execution. What is the component? The component is approximately concerning the ICT companies in Egypt, the training components, the academia, and the PWDs, or the person with disabilities, so that we take in consideration what is the needs of the ICT companies and what's available for the training industry in Egypt, and also what are the academia doing in their education. And we try to take in consideration the needs of the PWPs so that we integrate them in the whole process of working in the ICT industry. As I told you before, we reached to 62 jobs between the IT products and services, in addition to the electronic and hardware and telecommunication, information technology enabled services. We had reached to a whole handbook or a manual for the companies to adopt it, and at the same time we reached to an agreement with the Supreme Council of Universities in Egypt, whether public or private, to include the requirements in their curriculum, so that we had this manual. The manual is putting the right steps for the companies to adopt this national competency framework, in addition to how the universities or educational institutions could modify their curriculum to be adapted to this competency framework. We started the adoption process with 3 universities. They are private, in addition to another 2 public universities on process. They are signing next week, on next Sunday. Also, we are working with 7 companies to take their feedback concerning the part related to this adoption. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now have time for questions, but our speaker will probably be happy to take questions sitting here. Okay, we have about 5 minutes for questions. Now, keen students are normally in the first 2 rows, so is there a keen student wanting to ask a question? Maybe not so keen, really. Maybe keen students know it all already. I think that's unlikely. Who would like to start the questions from further back, if we can? I'll start with chairman's privilege then, and come back to my hobby horse. When you're looking, and we had an interesting discussion with a country in sub-Saharan Africa at breakfast this morning. When you're looking for models to do this kind of thing, of course, we think we're all very clever people, but sometimes it's convenient to look outside the country for inspiration. I mean, I think this is very impressive. I worry that it would be difficult in the UK to tell the universities to do things. One might gently encourage them, but these are the cultural factors. What kind of other countries did you look at to get wisdom and inspiration for setting this up?
I think that when we finish the adoption phase, which will end mid of next year, sorry, we can start communicating with the Arab universities and also the African countries, because we are cooperating. We just was in one of our famous ICT forums last week, and we were discussing this with some of the African ministers working in the ICT arena to start putting the steps for cooperation with them in raising their talent also according to our experience and knowledge in implementing such a project. The issue is that this project, as I told you, under the umbrella of E4E, or Education for Employment, which is a program adopted by IFC. So that the umbrella or the issue is that this is an international for the countries working in the field of ICT, especially the developing countries, to narrow the gap between education and employment.
Thank you. Do we have a question from the floor now to follow up? As far as my eyes can see, we don't. So we'll move on then to our second speaker. We'll have a session at the end where perhaps some of the more general topics will come up. So please, our second speaker is ready. We're going along the... no, actually, no, you've swapped. Yes. Welcome to Rafal Lew-Starowicz from the Ministry of National Education, Poland. He tells me they have just one ministry for education, which certainly is not the case in some other countries. I think one ministry is better in a way, but that's a value judgment. He is a Deputy Director at the Ministry of National Education, coordinating the educational policy of innovation in Poland. He's a graduate from the University of Warsaw, Faculty of Journalism and Political Science, and also a PhD from the Institute of Media Education in the Faculty of Educational Sciences at the University of Special Education. So a multi-talented official who will now present his information on Poland. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here. And let's move from Egypt, from Africa, to North Europe. I will say a few words about our country for those who are from far or are not aware how it looks, what we are doing there. These pictures are from the Warsaw capital, where the past meets future. And that's what we are trying to do. Like Mark Burkhardt said in the scholar in his novel, that we should do in education the same what conquistador Cortes done with the ships. After they reached America, they sank all ships, and his crew saw that. But here, what we are trying to do, of course, there is no return to old world in education, but what we trying to do is to use as much as we can from what we already learn and what we have. In a nutshell, we have nowadays, after reform, we currently a big reform in Poland. 25, more than almost 26,000 schools, and almost 700,000 of teachers, students almost 5 million. And we have quite a decentralized system of education, but still in the government hands is a core curriculum, examination, external examination system, and general framework of teacher status and evaluation of schools. From one hand, our students, as you may see, are very talented. We got a lot of medals from the International Olympiad in Informatics. And okay, this is the countries are not visible, they should be on the left. But this is the 4th place that we got here. So, as I said, we have a lot of gold medals. Our teachers are very active. They willingly taking part in very many initiatives like Code Week. You may see how many events took place in Poland. And many teachers are involved in e-twinning program, but from the other hand, we got poor Pisa results in problem solving with computer assistance, and what we can notice is the decline number of IT students. In Pisa 2015, we are not taking part in any case. So, but the results were poor that time. We have implemented new core curriculum, and the big change was to implement programming to our curriculum from the 1st grade. So for all K-12 students will learn how to code. And this is something that we think that it will drive innovation to our education system. And what is new, it's also the compliance with laws and safety rules, because we are now more focused also on internet safety. We run the project called Programowanie, which means programming. We have a portal with all materials for teachers and students for all grades. There are OER, Open Educational Resources. The basic priorities for this year, for this school year, is acquiring the new core curriculum, improving science and IT education quality, and internet safety. And all teacher training centers follows these priorities. Then here we discovered that, in fact, our schools have a very, very weak connection to the internet. The broadband access, it's not so usual in Poland. So in next 2 years, all Polish schools will get the broadband access at least 100 megabytes per second. This is a minimum standard for all schools. The President of Poland signed a parliamentary act like 2 weeks ago. So, so we are sure that we can provide the internet for all schools, which helps a lot, of course, to implement e-materials, e-sources. Yeah? So that's something which is quite important. And regarding e-materials, we've spent already more than 10 millions for e-textbooks, which are also the OER, and schools are free to use it, and everyone can use for every subject. We already have those e-textbooks, and we self-government in Poland is responsible for supplying schools in materials, also with the equipment, but we also we launched some projects to supply schools with interactive monitors, whiteboards, and so on. So from time to time, we are launching the projects like that when we see that there are some gaps to fill in. And one thing I can invite you all, the open night for new technology in education, so all stakeholders are invited to take part in that event that will take place at 9th of March next year. And so during the night, all the libraries, public institutions, but also companies, schools can organize some events for education and advert themselves, and of course we just want to attract especially young people to the new technology and to show them how it may be used at school. So that's basically everything, but I'm waiting for your comments, remarks, and questions. Thank you very much.
Right, so who would like to ask a question? I mean, to me, there are several fascinating points about that, but I'm just the chairperson. Let me just check, because this is quite topical. I think you said that the e-materials are actually OER, Open Educational Resources. That's very interesting, and I think is quite a transformative statement. Just pressing you slightly more, then, are the in terms of the open license used, does it contain a no commercial exclusion, or does it not?
I mean, we already in this year, to the end of this year, we'll have the brand new amount, about 10,000 materials, and all those e-textbooks are, I mean, commercially excluded. But you can freely use a part or all of that materials for the educational purpose. And of course, some parts of that are also it can be taken, but you have to look thoroughly to all the parts, you know, and check it. But basically, all students or teachers, even abroad, they can freely use it. Yeah?
Right. Thank you. That's very useful. There's another topic that occurs to me on the programming aspect, and I would like some feedback from the room. Please put your hand up if you come from a country which this semester is now teaching programming in your schools, in your K-12 system. Okay, so to me that does generate an obvious question. One of the things we found over the years in the UK is when you do something like this in schools, the universities can sometimes be not so supportive as you would like. They say, typically what they say, and I'm quite old, so I've seen this 3 or 4 times in my career, and I've been in the university as well as helping schools. The universities say, what a pity you're teaching the wrong language. Now, wrong means the one the professor doesn't like, of course. It's not necessarily a strategic statement. And the other thing they typically say, and this applies to other subjects like mathematics, don't worry about what you learned at school. We'll teach you properly when you come to university. Now, both of these can be rather negative and dispiriting factors to students who have worked hard, because quite often when you introduce programming, and this round is no different, the schools and the students have worked really hard. Often the syllabus is only just finalized. The first year or two, the students are working really hard, and if they hear these messages from universities, it's quite disappointing. So I would just like to, and I'd welcome some comments from the audience too, because you may have this in your country. What are the universities saying about this initiative? Are they positive, negative, neutral, or mixed?
In Poland, the new core curriculum has been developed by the representatives of the universities as well. I mean, the chair of this group was from the university in Toruń, and they were talking about this from many years, that we should do something, because they saw that this decline of the students, the IT students, is a huge problem to them. There is a big number of students who, after the major exams, they are going to universities, but after 1 year, they just drop out from that. But of course, the universities, they will prepare teachers, the future teachers, and they will also train teachers in Poland and show them how to code. But in this process, for the last year, we basically counted on the educational offices in Poland. We have not in every country, like in Finland, they don't have it. Inspectors, yes, there are school inspectors, but they were also organizing the training in the country on field, where almost all teachers could come and get familiar with our core curriculum. But of course, the university, they play quite a big role, and especially that we have those state universities that follows our work, and I have to mention that NGOs and its potential really helped us to convince teachers that this is something that should not put any anxiety to their work, but those who had the opportunity to see how it works are really keen on that now.
Thank you. Right, a question from the floor, please. Oh, you have no need to shout.
Hello? Oh, good. This is a question for both of the first 2 speakers, because both of the first 2 speakers come from countries that have very large diasporas outside of their home country. Okay, many, many millions of people. And we're talking about school as an institution, but what is the importance of technology platforms and of open educational resources outside of the formal school system of a given country? I mean, we all know how many Poles and how many Egyptians there are outside of the school system because they're not in their home countries. I think it's an important factor, but I'd like the people who are most involved in it to speak to that.
I'm wondering if we should actually wait for our third speaker, because I think some of that, I mean, it's a great question, but I think I can see Jan would like to address this, I suspect. So if you don't mind, if you're happy.
I haven't
and then, nor have I, and then we'll take that as our first general topic. So please, are there any other questions that people have? Is there any questions specific to the last talk? Okay, let's move. Oh, yes, please. A keen student has suddenly become keener.
I was just wondering, because you talked also about the internet speeds available in the schools, but I think maybe you can reflect on how that is in people's homes, because I think a lot of these skills are not something you learn in one moment, but you have to practice and keep interacting with, even when you're at home in your daily life. So I was wondering, maybe you can say for your country in particular, but maybe we can open this up later, how that situation is right now.
When we looked at the offer of internet content providers, we discovered that what schools already have is something that the family of consists of 3 or 4 people have for the long time, and it's something that even it's much faster than the schools that consist of number of students around 500 has. So basically, I can confirm that teachers and students are using internet, but outside the schools. That's why we have to meet those expectations, and especially to show students what they can do with that tool, because it used to be like that, and we were talking many times that they are, the students are native. Mark Prensky is attending conference as well, yeah? But all research confirmed that this is not, this is half true. Because what they are doing there, it's not usually very efficient, and they are not so well skilled in terms of using ICT. So that's why the programming and all those activities will probably, we really count that will help them. But without internet, it's pointless totally, yes, because to use all those extra materials, they are really nice, but without efficient internet access, it's even worse than to try to implement that. It's even worse than not to implement it at all, because they were just start to boring with that and fed up. So I think that this is the first step. It was a pity that for the last years we spent as a government so many resources we were putting it for developing materials and stuff like that, but we forgot about the, something that is really basic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to Jan Pakulski, our third speaker, who has a long and distinguished career. He joined the European Commission in 2009, but before that worked for many years for the World Bank in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, he was an expert in the area of social development for the Dutch government, the FAR program, the Council of Europe, and others. He's also worked in a Netherlands-based international NGO. He's managed to pick up degrees from 2 countries, so he is a true citizen of Europe, and obviously a very busy person. So and he will talk about digital badges, so you see the relevance to the question.
Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. You make me feel even older. Dear colleagues, I'm delighted to be here. We actually at the interesting point of this session becoming interesting, and here I am with another PowerPoint presentation. So I try to be brief. I'm actually here for a very specific purpose of presenting to you the main highlights of the report that we recently published. This is our annual kind of State of the Union report on the situation of education across the 28 EU member states. Let me start though with 2 footnotes. One, don't mean to sound bureaucratic. You may actually be interested to hear that the European Commission adopted a formal rule that prevents Commission officials to participate in panels that are single gender. So I'm actually not quite comfortable. I don't blame the organizers. They have clearly more liberal rules, but technically speaking, I should have not accepted this invitation. It's my oversight. Nonetheless, I'm delighted to be here, but for the record, you should know about our rule, which I think is a very important one, and I personally believe in it. Second footnote is those who are from outside the European Union or don't follow European project, its internal dynamics, I should maybe make one kind of clarification. The competence for policies in education within European Union rest with the EU member states. So that is a sovereign right of the governments. There are some other areas where governments agreed to pass the competence to the European Commission, European Union. I'm referring to foreign policy, trade, for example. Education is not the case, and that may prompt a question on your part: what am I doing here? What is the role of the Commission under the circumstances? And it is actually a very interesting interplay and an interesting dynamic that I witness every day. We are much more in the business of promoting good practices, of helping governments understand what works in education, what works less well in education, and let's remember it's a very dynamic area. Certainly if we talk about ICT and developments in this particular area. So in that context, we of course try to collect evidence and we invest significant resources in international surveys, in commissioning studies. Paul mentioned one of them, he's involved in directly, I understand. We also, of course, organize a structured dialogue among member states where they really have possibility to discuss specific sectoral issues in education. We also issue important policy statements where we kind of urge governments or encourage governments to take initiatives in certain areas. Again, migration crisis being a perfect recent example. We got all hit by a train overnight. Crisis confronted Europe with migration at a very short notice and prompted a lot of very significant challenges and the need for response. So that's again a good example where we work together with the governments, and in that sense, really try to find not a consensus, we never reached that one, but really a kind of common understanding what are the challenges and how different countries could respond to specific issues. My own team produces this annual monitor, which is exactly part of that exercise. You can see it in that context. We monitor the performance of education systems in Europe and publish this every November. So this is just has come out, and that's when the organizers encouraged me to bring it to your attention. We also, of course, fund significant program called Erasmus+, that supports mobility of students and teachers across the European Union. And that, again, gives us a seat at the table with the member states, but also certainly gives us an instrument where we can connect our policy work with specific funding and program for specific activities. So that's just a clarification. I know this is international audience and our peculiar European project is not always well understood. This year's edition is the 6th one. I'll really keep it short because I do want to link up to area discussion. So we always routinely look at the performance of the member states vis-a-vis 6 benchmarks. So that's another thing I should maybe mention. We have agreed on the member states on the monitoring framework. Yes, dear ministers, let's agree on what are we going to monitor as far as performance of all 28 countries. And there are 6 benchmarks. The 2 most important ones is one refers to the early school leaving and another one to tertiary attainment. There are specific targets, numerical targets for that. They are supposed to be met by 2020. We are actually almost there. All women in Europe met both targets. Men are making progress. Nonetheless, there are big disparities within countries, and I will briefly touch on it, time permitting. We also, this year, were quite alarmed by the latest Pisa survey. We were delighted on one hand that all EU member states participated. This is performance of 15-year-olds. I probably don't need to explain it here in this group. But the cold shower came with the results. We actually made a step backwards. Europe is doing less well. I'm referring to all three domains Pisa survey covers. The latest one provided particularly detailed data on science. And the deterioration was, benchmark is in this area is 15%. We would like to have member states no more than 15% of underachievers, that is not meeting certain performance level measured by Pisa. And we thought quite close in the Pisa 2012 round at 16%. Now we slipped to 21%. So that is an alarming voice, and again, concern we bring to the attention of policymakers. We routinely monitor expenditures on education. This is not to say that throwing more money on education necessarily guarantees better results. Generally speaking, intuitively speaking, maybe yes, but there is a big question and a big challenge in education of efficient investment in education. And if you look at the Pisa results or PIAC results, which is its bigger sister survey spreading across all age groups, and run those against the investments, the link is not there. It's actually many other forces at play that impact the final outcome. Then there's also a question, and that's a special focus of this edition, big challenge for Europe, the equity. Equity, let's maybe spend a minute on what do we mean by that, because equity has very different manifestations. In each one of them, education has a role to play. Education, inequality is toxic. It's toxic to economic growth. It's toxic to the human individual's health, functioning in the society, and so on and so forth. So we looked at inequality, number one, in very economic sense, simply income disparities, adjusted for, there are quite specific instruments for that. We also looked at gender inequalities. We look at the urban-rural divide. We looked certainly in great detail now about the disparities between performance of native-born population versus migrants, first-generation migrants, second generation of migrants. Very telling stories, prompting a lot of ideas for the response, and clearly stressing that the challenge is very much there. Europe got better in coping with inequality, but it is still a big challenge. It also has a quick spillover on employment opportunities. And you can also see that it's, again, not a surprise to you. The better educated you are, the better chances you have of being employed, of having better pay and better employment. We go into more details on this in the report itself. I would encourage you to take a look. Poverty and the risk of slipping into poverty or social exclusion, again, is very much reversely proportional to education. And that's, again, gets really quite alarming if you go deeper into specific country examples. I should say that this monitor has 2 volumes. There is a second one, way thicker, which consists of 28 country-specific chapters. This one is the cross-country comparison, I think more interesting for this audience. I mentioned different manifestations of inequality. I will not dwell on it again. This is in great detail in our report. Here you have some more specific breakdowns I was referring to. Really big thing is the situation of migrants. You can see that in terms of performance in Pisa, in the science domain, they clearly show much worse performance. And that really calls for response of the policymakers with some specific measures. across all sectors, really. I don't have the slides here, but there's also quite interesting analysis to see how migrant students perform depending how long they have been in the education system of the receiving country. And obviously, the longer they are, the more they follow the national pattern, so to say. But it's quite clear to see that at what specific age groups teachers should be particularly focused on integrating migrant population. Let me also make a footnote here, the TALIS survey that we co-funded with OECD. This is the last one, I think, targeted 55,000 teachers in some 30 countries. It was very clear. Teachers really made a very strong point. They are lacking skills on dealing with, by the way, ICT, dealing with children with special needs. But now the new issue is integrating migrants. And again, different countries are better at this than others. Moving on, major determinant today of the performance of students in Europe is the socio-economic background, which is very scary. And this is not something we would like to see. Historically, also in some countries, this is getting worse. In this sense, again, you can also take a look at the disparities within countries. How long is that little line in some countries, and how big are the disparities? And that, again, is a major determinant of students' performance. Second one being the education of parents, which is also quite important to keep in mind. Gender, it's actually quite a story, because if you look at the EU line, it's actually quite symmetrical. Women in Europe, the gap in education between men and women is 10% in favor of women. Women are better educated. In terms of employment, the gap is exactly 10% as well, but the opposite. It's women who have much worse opportunities to obtain employment. In some countries, as you can see, that is quite dramatic. Early school leavers, big indicator we follow very closely, also historically. I will not dwell on it, but again, big disparities are there. Nonetheless, as far as the target is concerned, we are on the way of meeting it, and as I said earlier, women have met it. Here's a little summary of what I already said. I will not spend more time of it. Copies of the monitor are outside the room. Tertiary education, big thing. Until recently, Europe was clearly behind North America, behind Japan, in terms of number of students that completed tertiary education. We know very clearly that, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of employment, in terms of functioning in the labor market, in the modern society, tertiary education matters a lot. We set up a target of 40% by 2020. We are almost in 2020, and we are almost on with the target. But again, this has a very clear spillover effect on labor productivity, on Europe's competitive powers vis-à-vis other continents and countries around the world. That's, again, a little summary slide. I more or less drew your attention to this already. A big ticket item, if I can put it that way, not always appreciated by the politicians, is early childhood education, so that preschool education. And here, again, the target was set up back in 2009. By now, we are almost there, but again, not all countries, and again, this has very clear consequences for the actual performance at the later stage in educations of young people and then adult learning, adult education. Here is the summary slide on the performance of Pisa. I will not take your time on that. Again, Pisa with a comparison across the latest 3 Pisa rounds. One other dimension I wanted to show to you, again, going to employment prospects, we set the target of employment rate reaching 82%, which was the pre-crisis, crisis of 2008. We are almost there as European Union. Again, in some countries, unemployment, youth unemployment particularly, is still a subject of big concern. Europe is doing very badly on lifelong learning, on adult education. And it's really worrisome. We are an aging continent. The irony is that people with best skills are most inclined to seek additional education, whereas those who have least education are least motivated or encouraged to follow additional education. So that is a big concern, and the program I mentioned earlier, Erasmus+, we are also not quite happy how that program has performed so far, and again, are looking now in the context of the next generation of our programs after 2020, how to strengthen that dimension of our work. On the expenditures of education, I just tell you, with the footnote I mentioned at the beginning, don't assume that the performance of the systems is better, but the good news is after the crisis, country after country is now spending more on education. We are at the 5% of GDP at the EU average, which is still below some other countries. Nonetheless, it's a good, already quite a good figure. It is the fourth largest government expenditure if you look how, at the situation, how governments spend the resources. I set up a little alarm clock to make sure I don't go beyond my 20 minutes. I have two more, but again, this is public expenditure. Maybe a few words, and that's the summary of the various targets. And finally, just to refer you that all of it you can find on our website. But let me now make a quick bridge to what colleagues have said, and I really spent a few minutes on the whole question of the ICT. It was hidden more or less in some of the slides, certainly when we talk about tertiary education. The Commission spent quite a lot of time in terms of sensitizing our member states to the whole dimension of the digital changes in our civilization, but also specifically what opportunities it offers to education systems. We actually published two important documents back in 2012 and 2013. I don't want to bother you with our technical jargon, but these were political statements for the government, one on rethinking education in light of that change, and another one on opening up education. We are also actively supporting other Commission services on promoting European digital single market. That is a very ambitious undertaking with many manifestations in various sectors. We are right now preparing an important communication on it's actually an action plan on digital education, which has some specific measures we are proposing. I'm not in a position to disclose them all, but as you can imagine, they do touch, again, on things I mentioned already, on furnishing teachers with better education in this area, on getting better evidence. We just agreed with OECD colleagues that the Pisa in 2018 will have a module on measuring ICT skills among young people. We are funding a major survey conducted by European Commission also on that topic with another service, and hope to have the results in 2019. So that is a very important area for us. The digital competences, we are looking at this very carefully, and again come with specific recommendations. In the same context, there is also effort to fund high-speed broadband availability. In schools, universities are already in much better shape. The big priority area here is schools that are involved in vocational education training that quite often are less well equipped than many other countries. So, just making a link to the question posed, but again, the two colleagues here are way better positioned representing specific countries. I happen to be Polish myself, but as a kind of international civil servant, I must say I like the question because it has yet another important dimension. When we talk about minorities on various, again, in my little universe, European countries' soil, there is an issue of, when we talk about integration, of providing language education, as well as providing opportunity to continue education of the mother tongue in the new country. And I think there is also a very interesting experience. The country we are in, Germany, already for several years, colleagues may correct me, I believe has offered the possibility of passing the Abitur, the Matura test, in the local language, in their native language they speak at home, which is not German. So for us, we are now discussing, is there a reason to agree with the member states on another benchmark, on learning foreign languages? That is an important dimension. We believe if we talk about 21st century, the way we function in societies, we also have very clear evidence from employers. Knowledge of foreign languages, of course, is appreciated and raises the chances of young people to get employment. So in that sense, this is yet another important dimension. One other thing that preoccupies us, that's not related to the question, but I think maybe interesting for this audience is, of course, what do we do? How do we respond when we talk about ICT, the ease of accessing information and data, and our kids, you know, find things on smartphones in no time, whereas at my age, at least, we had to go to the library. I remember my father being buried in several volumes of encyclopedias. And if you look at this and confront it with the whole story of alternative facts, how do we train the young population and the adult population, for that matter, to get smarter about it, to be critical, to develop critical thinking, and be less vulnerable to things that are produced sometimes with some very wiki intentions. I leave it for your thoughts, but that is something we are really reflecting on. No shortcuts in this area, but this is certainly a big challenge to all of us. Thank you.
If anyone was going to rush out for lunch, don't bother. They're all ahead of you. So we will finish at 1:15 promptly. It's one of these situations where being a bit later is actually a benefit. Now, I'd like to return to the general question. Would our questioner just like to repeat the question so we all know what it was? And there may be slightly different wording in the light of the information you've heard now.
Well, I mean, I would add to that the fact that, inter-European migration is also affected here. But no, just to repeat the question, I don't have any real changes to it. What is the importance of open educational resources on technology platforms in the policy area? How can policymakers really try to push that out, not just to their formal school systems right there in their countries within their borders, but what are they doing and what can they do better to get beyond that to their diasporas, whether they be close diasporas, Poles in Ireland, okay, or far diasporas, Poles in Vancouver, I don't know. But, what can be done?
Okay, I think, I don't think we have any Poles in Vancouver on the panel this year. I would like to start with our speaker from Egypt, because of course Egypt has a number of collaborative arrangements with the Commission, and of course the language there is Arabic, which of course is increasingly spoken in various dialects within the EU. And I think if you had some comments on the open educational resources issue, which is active in all countries in one way or another.
Egypt is using the MOOCs very intensively, and we have a big program for especially training the people specialized in the ICT with the big players in the MOOCs like Udacity, like Coursera, and something like that, so that we are heavily using the MOOCs, we are heavily using internet-based training for training the specialized people in the field of ICT. In addition to that, we have also a specialized university, a pure e-learning university called EELU, Egyptian E-Learning University. They started to deliver their undergraduate and postgraduate programs, I think, 5 years ago. So that we started e-learning, or we starting technology-based learning in Egypt very early. I myself was one of the people who has started these programs in Egypt in 1997. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps moving on to Poland next, and then up to the Commission, if we can put it that way. First of all, from Poland. Taking your earlier statements now in a more general context of informal and learning, and it's probably good to mention badges at some point, because otherwise we'll have a supplementary question there too.
Thank you. I think that what we discover doing research on e-materials, that they play a rather supportive role in teaching and learning process in schools. And that's, of course, maybe because of this lack of broadband access, but still, even those materials that are approved by the government, I mean, textbooks, which are the same, they based on the same legal act as other textbooks, I mean, paper version. Even it's are treated as a kind of additional material. So, of course, we are not developing it. I mean, the ministry is, as everyone in the world, not producing anything. We are just asking the companies to do that in public procurement. But still, I think that because teachers, they still prefer to go for the e-materials that are follows the paper version of books, of textbooks, because the publishers, they are giving a package that consists of the paper version and the materials or access to the platforms. Of course, what we already have, we should, now we are working on better possibility to gain this all materials from the web, because from the many projects we have lots of those materials, and teachers, they have to spend a lot of time looking for it on the web. So that's one thing. But of course, if it is even not open resources, I think that it's quite accessible when it is followed by the paper version. So I think that there's a place to both. Yes, I mean the market. There's a demand and for the government in that, so we can supply at least with the minimum material.
Final word from the Commission on open educational resources, or enough has been said already. Okay, I think that's a very interesting question. One perhaps takeaway I would suggest people to think about. Many of the European, many of the member states have substantial diasporas, and one of the things we noticed in an earlier project for the European Commission was that there are many, the US people would call them online K-12 schools. In Europe, we tend to call them virtual schools, so that the children of the parents in the diaspora can keep in contact, often with the language, quite often with the culture of their original nation, and also in several cases with the qualifications of that home nation, because there's often a belief that the diaspora is a kind of one-way approach, but there are a number of diasporas which grow, and then sometimes people return. International diplomats, business people, all of them have children in far-flung places. And it's interesting that European countries, even very small countries, have been quite active in that area. And it's quite a good approach. And of course, it could apply to other communities, not necessarily from within Europe, but it doesn't seem to, or at least if it does, it's not visible. I suspect these systems exist in many countries, but no one's been looking at them. And I think they're a very valuable way of building, integration with their original community, and also integration with the host community. So there's lots to think about. So I think that was a very thought-provoking question. Just on a procedural note, I will take back the note about the gender imbalance of the panel. I'm on the steering committee of Online Educa, and I will certainly take that back. And note that this panel appeared to be unusual in the session, and make sure it doesn't happen again wherever we can make it so. The fourth speaker we had was also male, which compounds the felony, as they might say in English law. Anyway, thank you for your attention and questions, and I think it's right to give one more vote of thanks to all the speakers. Thank you.